I wanted to make this video talking about the comparisons between the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the American invasion of Iraq because these comparisons are being used to say that Americans have no right to be critical of Russia, and on the surface, this is an easy comparison to make. However, the subtle differences are a matter of critical importance. The only similarities lay in the fact that these are both post-nuclear, modern military actions. For instance, both conflicts were preceded by destabilization efforts in the way of empowering separatists in marginalized and culturally different parts of the country being invaded. In America's case, we sent special forces and funding to the Peshmerga in the north of Iraq. In Russia's case, they sent special forces and funding to the separatists in Luhansk and Donetsk regions of Ukraine. The subtle and important difference being Russia denied having any involvement, and America declared their intent for military action in Iraq with the express intention of removing Saddam Hussein from power. The similarity is surface level and unimportant. All modern military action will be preceded this way with destabilization efforts. The difference in transparency and honesty on the international stage is the important difference. America passes legislation through Congress, and Russia denies everything. Another more damning similarity is the validations given to the American people and the Russian people by their own governments and media. Both fed their people lies and exaggerations to garner support and build morale in their military. America said the attacks on 9/11 were connected to Saddam Hussein, which has since been proven mostly false. The majority of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia, while Russia claims that the Nazis have taken over Ukraine, when the reality is the Ukrainian elected leader is Jewish and Ukraine has no more Nazi or white supremacist presence than anywhere else in the world. The important difference here being that the American government disseminated information, at least loosely based in reality, to media monopolies that would debate the information and its validity, whereas Russia orders its state-run media monopoly to deliver a fabrication to its people. As for validations that are at least based in reality, Russia claims NATO is a threat, and America claimed Saddam was a threat with WMDs. While many NATO members may not be a fan of Russia, it is a defensive organization of separate nations, who has partnered with Russia as recently as 2011 during the joint strikes in the Middle East known as Operation Vigilant Skies. It can also be plainly stated that even though Saddam was an evil dictator, his regime did not possess nuclear capabilities, nor the ability to threaten America directly. The difference again being more important, Saddam was a dictator for over 20 years who did possess chemical weapons and was a legitimate threat to his own people and other nations in the Middle East. Zelensky, on the other hand, was democratically elected in 2019, and Ukraine has not been involved in hostile actions since the independence from Russia in 1990s. As with most things, actions speak louder than words, and each country's international movements speak volumes about their intentions. Well before 2003, in the invasion of Iraq, America and Russia had a history in the Middle East. After Russia backed a coup d'etat of a pro-British government in 1958, the CIA backed a coup in 1963. Russia then obviously moves to destabilize this pro-Western government and eventually succeeds, bringing Saddam Hussein into power. By the time the 1990s roll around, Iraq has been the scene of a proxy war for 50 years. At this point, things are entirely off the rails. Saddam is using chemical weapons in a war with Iran that goes nowhere, and shortly after launches an invasion of Kuwait. Even Russia denounces the regime at this point, not enough to support the UN coalition that's launched to defend Kuwait in the Gulf War, and then after the Gulf War, a UN coalition patrols the skies in Iraq in an operation known as Southern Watch in order to stabilize the region. This is simultaneously defending Iraq from its own government and from outside nations looking to strike at the weakened nation. In 1998, America passes the Iraq Liberation Act of 1998 with the express intent of removing Saddam Hussein from power and pushing for a new democratic regime. That same year, Operation Desert Fox is launched, bombing infrastructure important to the regime's military. 4 years later, Saddam is still in power, and America declares war with the Authorization for Military Use of Force against Iraq Resolution of 2002. America then attempts to build a UN coalition towards its goals. However, facing a veto from UN members, including France, Canada, and Russia, America decides to proceed without the UN, and in 2003 invades Iraq. This leads to worldwide condemnation, including the largest international protests recorded at the time. As with the international actions in the Middle East, Russia's actions on its own borders speak loudly as well. During the Moldo-Russian War in 1990, Russia backed separatists with Russian troops in an attempt to secure the former Soviet nation of Moldova as a puppet state or to annex the country and make it part of the Russian Federation. It was successful only in bringing an area now known as Transnistria under Russian influence. Then, in 2008, Russia again supports separatists in the northern areas of Georgia, another former Soviet nation. With Russian support, the areas of South Ossetia and Abkhazia break away and declare independence from Georgia. The situation is almost identical to Russia's actions in Ukraine. Unfortunately, the leader of Georgia takes the bait and tries to take back the separatist regions by force. Russia then counterattacks and wipes out the Georgian military. This forces Georgia to make a truce favorable to Russia. This is undoubtedly what Russia thought would happen in 2014 Ukraine, when they annexed Crimea and supported Donetsk and Luhansk separatists. Instead, Ukrainian forces dug in along the contested borders and refused to provoke Russia, denying her the justification for military force, all while Western countries sent support to Ukraine. For reasons known only to Putin himself, in 2022, after a year of conducting military exercises on the border of Ukraine, Russia decides to invade Ukraine, declaring war with a unanimous vote by Putin's cabinet the day the military action started. When taking into account the history here, it's easy to see these conflicts for what they really are: proxy wars, small wars between regional factions that are propped up by global superpowers. Open military action between superpowers is so dangerous to life on Earth that all conflict is limited to supporting groups in border countries and areas of resource importance around the globe. We have to accept that this is the reality of our atomic age. Neither hegemony, East or West, will give up ground, and neither will stop trying to gain ground. While the overt military actions are the same, the underlying motivations are different. The West is a designation given to NATO countries and seeks to maintain the post-nuclear, post-World War II order. In the years after the world's biggest war, the rules were established to protect the sovereignty of nations around the world. Rules like universal human rights, maritime law, airspace agreements, and free trade. These practices have allowed for the most prosperous and peaceful century in human history. The Eastern powers, comprising the alliance of Russia and China and the nations in their spheres of influence, benefit from these practices but do not adhere to them. China bucks maritime law and claims the entire South China Sea as sovereign territory in an attempt to control global trade. Russia is systematically violating the sovereignty of nations on its borders to maintain its influence. Human rights may not be sacred in America, but at least we have some ability to hold our government accountable. Vladimir Putin has been Prime Minister of Russia for 5 years and President for 16, modifying the constitution to allow himself to stay in power. Xi Jinping has been in power since 2012 and continually restructures his government to empower himself. Globalization is inevitable. The only decision we're left with is what language do you want your kids to be speaking? Which culture will you support? Don't be on the wrong side of history.